Hello. In this lecture, we're going to speak about some aspects of communication, human communication, of course, and highlights of the development of speech and language skills, or the development of communication skills. My name is Dr. Ahmed Abdelal. I'm recording this particularly for the Bridgewater State University students in my intro class, and anyone is welcome, obviously. So this is based on the Gillam textbook, Communication Sciences and Disorders, and these materials are provided by the publisher, just to acknowledge the source. Okay, so in this lecture, I'm going to speak about the features of the components of language and the components of speech generally as forms of communication, forms of human communication. And then we'll speak about milestones, basic milestones in communication development. Before we start, I just want to point out that in order to develop communication skills, there has to be cognitive development that is parallel to the language skills that are developing. For example, children need memory. So memory, as it develops at a certain point to be strong enough, then the child is going to remember to be able to acquire new words, vocabulary, and to start to build vocabulary, and memory will enable the child to remember these words, the vocabulary words. And eventually, when the child is able to remember enough, the child is able to express himself or herself. So just make sure that we have cognitive development and we have communication development, and the two go parallel, but cognitive development in reality drives language development. And of course, yes, language development is going to come back again and enrich cognitive development, but you will kind of study this in more depth in the language acquisition and development class, and you are going to study the components of language that I'm going to speak about in the linguistics course. So this is what the material here that we are discussing in this presentation. Basically, it is almost like an overview of two courses that you will study as an undergrad student. So communication as a term, it means that you have two parties. Excuse me. You have a sender and you have a receiver. And the sender has a message. That message could be anything you can think about. It's an idea, it is a thought, it is a feeling. That message could be, going like this, which tells the other person, great. It could be like this, which means, how do I know? How am I supposed to know? It could be a word, it could be a wink. Whatever we do or say with the purpose of showing or telling someone something, whether by sign, by facial language, by body language, by words, by speech, that is communication. And communication is not limited to humans, of course. Every species has its own form of communication, and we focus on human communication. So part of communication, one kind of communication, is language. And how we convey language in either written language, we can express it, or we can express language verbally, orally, or we can express language with sign, gestures. So when we say communication again, there are many kinds of ways to communicate to someone a message. It doesn't have to be words. It doesn't have to be language. Language happened to be one mode of communication, and so language has to do with the meaning and the concepts and the words. So how do we give that language to someone? How has to do with speech and, for example, a speech or sign or writing, for example. So language is a big system made out of 5 major components. Each component or each aspect of language is a set of rules. For example, briefly, there's phonology, the sounds of the language. Phonology has to do with how you put sounds together, sequence them together in a certain way so you can establish out of them words. And then we have morphology, which has to do with the rules that we use to take these units of sound, like syllables, how we sequence them and form them, and how we construct words, and how we construct words out of other words. Like, how do we get the word written out of the word write? How do we get the word writing out of the word write? How do we get the word writer out of the word write? So all of these are ways of developing or deriving new words out of a root word. That is morphology. And then we have syntax. That is grammar. Syntax or a grammar is a recipe, a list of recipes, how to make various forms of sentences. So these recipes, we call them grammatical rules. And then we have semantics, or the content of the language. Like, I have something, a metal, piece of metal shaped in a certain way. Well, we just happen to call it spoon. Randomly, we give it the name spoon. And now, spoon is a concept, is a whole concept. When you describe it in that language, it means, a piece of metal shaped this way and that way. It is used for this or that purpose. So, semantics also has to do with the meaning of sentences. When you take words and put them together in a certain sequence, they mean something more than the number of words added individually. The sentence gives you a lot more. Like if you say a list of words, you say cat, and then you say do, and then you say cats, and then you say do, and you say not, and then you say for example corn, and they say the word eat. So when you take all of these words and list them, each one is a concept. It means something. It has a unit. It's a unit of meaning. So if we say these are 5 units, and if we say each unit has one unit, has one meaning, when you say put them all together and say cats do not eat corn, that sentence has more meaning than the 5 units that, 5, when you look at them individually. The sentence gives you more meaning than the total sum of the individual components of it. So anyways, the sentences have meanings, and sometimes the words that you say, for example, they don't mean anything that you can point to a word and say, oh, this is what the sentence means. Like, for example, the sky doesn't rain gold and silver. the sky doesn't rain gold and silver. You could say that to someone, meaning, you know what, don't wait for heaven to open and send you. You have to go to work for it. If you say it is raining cats and dogs, it doesn't mean...
Why, yes, it does seem to be raining.
Sorry, you guys. It doesn't mean that you are going to look up and you see cats and dogs landing and falling from the sky. There is not a single word in the sentence that means that. Yet you understand the meaning of the entire sentence as, oh, it is raining heavily. As I was saying, raining, that the phone picked up and was telling me the forecast. So, Siri. So anyways, and then we have pragmatics, which is the fifth component of the language, and that means how you use language and where you use it in the context. We'll discuss this more briefly, more detail later. But this is what language is, and any language in the world has these rules, has these sets of components, 5 components that you apply to any language at all. So languages are sets of rules that we call them, for example, components or parameters, and they enable us to reproduce language, to teach language to others, and so on. And speech is just a way of expressing that language that humans use to express that language. And as I mentioned, you can express that language in writing, in sign, or whatever form, in art maybe even. Or you can express it in speech, and speech includes 3 parts. It includes voice, and it includes articulation, and it includes fluency, how fluent you are. So the building blocks of speech. Speech, the smallest part of speech is a human sound system. That is the smallest part of the language. It's called a phoneme. Comes from the word phone. The word phone in Greek means sound. But it can be a sound of the rain, sound of anything, a human sound, whatever. But a human sound, a human speech sound is phoneme. So the smallest sound in a language is a phoneme. So when you say the word cat, k, a, t. In phonetics, when you study phonemes, we don't say cat, the first sound is a C. We say it's a k, because that is what you say, this is what you hear. But it happened that the symbol for that k is a C. So we don't worry about spelling when we do look at phonetics and study the sounds of the language. We look at what you hear is what you get. So cat, k, a, t, has 3 phonemes. And then allophones are different ways of saying, one single phoneme. For example, the k is a phoneme. And if you want to see how many ways you can say that phoneme, say k in different words. Like say key. As I say key, you don't even hear anything. Before I say E, you find that my lips are retracted and shaped in that way to be ready to say the E. So when you say, before you say E, this is how the lips are. Key. So that is one way, retracted, for example. K. But you could also say cool. Before you say oo, you notice as you say cool, your lips are going to be ready to say the oo, so they will make the k rounded. Cool, cool. So, and then you could also say car, car. Your mouth is open. So many forms, each form is called an allophone. It's an alternative way of saying the same phoneme. Minimal pairs are two words. It's a pair of words that are different only in a single sound. So that makes them, if you make that sound the same, both words will be a single word. So for example, excuse me, if you say the word can, and you have the word dan, can, dan, the only sound obviously is k in the first one and d in the second one. If you take d out and put k, you have the same word. If you say k, class, and you say another word g, grass, so class and grass are different only in a single sound. These are a minimal pair. The two of them are called a minimal pair. You could also, the sound can be in the middle or can be at the end. Say for example, cam and cat, class and let's find an easier pair. Clot and plot, or walk and for example walk and was, for example. So the last sound is different, and it is just a single sound. It could be at the end, it could be at the beginning, in the middle. As long as the two words are only different in a single sound, in a single phoneme, we call them a minimal pair. And then phonemes are described in terms of criteria. So to describe a vowel, we use certain conditions, certain labels. To describe a consonant, we use certain labels. So for example, if I describe a phoneme, a vowel, we say oo, as in pool. Oo. I call that sound high, high, back sound. I call it rounded. I call it tense, because, so these are four criteria I'm going to speak about. So these are for vowels. Now what's if it's a consonant? I'm going to call it, describe it based on where in the mouth or the oral or the vocal tract, where the sound is produced. I say p. What kind of sound is that? We say, oh, look at the placement, is by the lips. So two lips come together, they make that sound, bilabial sound. So I describe p as bilabial. And then what does it sound like when you make it? Well, it sounds like as you are making it, you stop the air completely, because you say p, you shut the airway completely, stop the air. So we call that sound a stop sound. So it is both bilabial and both, we call it also a stop sound, a bilabial stop. But then we describe the sound, the consonant, based on if the vocal folds vibrate when you say that consonant. If the vocal folds vibrate, we say the sound is, or the consonant is, voiced. So that is what we mean by voicing. And we'll demonstrate this in the next few slides. So speech also has, has syllables. It's made out of syllables. A syllable, when we define a syllable in speech, we do not worry about the spelling. We worry about the sounds that you hear. So it's a unit of sounds that are put together following certain rules. And syllables, in order to form a syllable, you have to have a vowel sound as a nucleus. A vowel sound. That's the single and most important condition. Without a vowel, you cannot have a syllable at all. So the syllable consists of a sequence of sounds, but the minimal requirement is to have a vowel. Like you say, I see a, or I see a cat. A is one syllable by itself, and it's straightforward. When you say the word alone, at the beginning, that's a syllable by itself, and then you say alone is another syllable. There are syllables that have a single vowel, that's the minimum requirement, and the syllables that have a consonant or more before the vowel, or a consonant, there are syllables that have a consonant or more after the vowel, or syllables that have one consonant or more before and one consonant or more after. It depends. So in phonetics we describe them in detail. We say what comes before the vowel is, you call this, and what comes after you call it that, and I don't want to get into too much detail here. I do not want to overwhelm you. I want to make things simplified, but also give you examples as we go. And because I am not physically with you, I'm trying to explain so that not to make anything vague for you. So the lecture might take a little bit longer than the regular class. Prosody has to do with the music, the melody of the language. When we speak, we do not speak in the same loudness level. We do not speak in the same pitch. As we go, if you hold the microphone and as you try to record, for example, or speak, you notice sometimes you have on the screen, these sound waves going sometimes high up and sometimes lower, so it's constantly moving up and down, because that's how we can make an effect. We change our pitch constantly, second by second as we speak, and we change our loudness second by second as we speak, so that to be more effective and to engage our listeners. Because if you do not make these changes as you speak, changes in pitch and loudness and so on, then your listener's nervous system is going to tune you out. It will not process your sounds. It will not pay attention to you. It is like when you have, say, a truck comes all of a sudden and next to a building, and it just parks, it stops next to a building, but the engine is running, and you feel the sound is so loud, but it takes you like 20 seconds, and then you are not aware of that sound anymore. You don't even feel it exists, even though it is the same sound, but it is your nervous system. It stops channeling it and making you aware of it. We call this habituation. It's a natural thing. So prosody is the melody of the language. It's like waves, and it is parts of prosody. It is made out of pitch and loudness and duration. So pitch is if your pitch is high or low. For example, you say to someone, you are a college student. As a matter of fact, you are a college student. A simple statement. But I could say, I'm surprised you're a college student. For some reason, I just, so I say the same words, but with my raising pitch at the end. You're a college student? And that now makes it, instead of a statement, it makes it a question. And I wait for a response from you now. It could be, I could say it in a certain tone to say, what? You're asking me this question and you are a college student? I am shocked. So I could ask it this way in a certain tone using pitch and prosody to give that effect. It could be, I could ask the same words, I can say them, no change in the words, but the pitch is gonna tell me if I am like sarcastic, if I am giving a plain statement, if I'm asking a question, if I am expressing anger, sadness, if I'm expressing disappointment, and you name it. So pitch is very important in prosody of the language. Loudness, also we change our loudness level as we speak by about 10 decibels up and down as we speak, and that is part of human nature. Even little kids learn how to do that. And then duration, it has to do with how long it takes you to produce a certain sentence or a word or a sound as you speak. And as we speak also, we make pauses between units of the sentence. And of course, if we write these sentences, we match, we point out these pauses that we make in the form of periods, commas, dots, colons, semicolons, and so on. So these are the components of speech. Again, remember that speech is a way of expressing language in an oral manner or in a verbal way. So now we look briefly at two aspects of phonetics in terms of speech or phonology. So these two aspects have to do with how do we describe a vowel, how we describe a consonant. In writing in the English language we have 26 letters. Yet we have 43 sounds in the English language. And if you think about writing in English the classical way, you say, oh, you have 5 vowels. But in reality, the English language has 14 vowels. And it has, the rest of that is consonants, about 19. So anyways, the goal of phonetics, the studying of phonemes, is to take these 43 sounds in English and identify them, label each one, give each one a certain symbol to make each one unique. So if imagine like you have a class that has 43 students, and then you say Sarah, and then 5 students raise their hands. All of them are Sarahs. Oh, that's still confusing. Say Sarah Smith, and then you have 3 of the students raising their hands because all of them are called Sarah Smith. So you want to say a name and only a single person raises his or her hand. So that consonant or vowel has a unique set of labels that only that sound will have, nothing else has. So you describe them, each one is going to have a unique set of characteristics and qualities that, combined together, no other sound will have. And that's the purpose. So we have 14 vowels. When we describe vowels, we describe them based on 4 criteria. 2 of these criteria have to do with the tongue, where the tongue is. Because if the tongue is up, down, forward, back, that will make the vowel different. So we also look at the vowel in terms of if the tongue is high, if the tongue is in the middle, or if the tongue is in the low, like sitting low in the oral cavity. So we describe that in terms of tongue height and tongue advancement. Is the tongue front, center, or back? Is the tongue low, mid, or high? And based on that, we actually say the vowel itself. So if the tongue is high, we say the vowel is high. If the tongue is back, we say that the vowel is a back vowel. And then we have two other criteria. One of these has to do with the lips. Are the lips rounded or are they not rounded? And then the fourth, the other criteria, the criterion is it has to do with the level of tension that the muscles of, labial muscles, facial muscles, everything, muscles that are involved, how long do they spend while making the sound? If they take a longer time to hold and contract to make the sound, we call that sound tense because it will have more muscular tension. If the sound, if the organs don't take as long, the muscles don't take as long to say the sound, then we call that sound a lax sound. For example, take the word seat. When you say eat, the e it takes a longer time. Sometimes, some people, generally, we can describe that e as a long sound. But then take the word sit. So we have seat, the e is tense, and then sit, becomes lax. Even though they are basically the same sound, they are produced in the same way when the tongue is, in the same location and all of this, but one of them is tense, that the muscles spend longer in making it, and one is lax. Say the word cool. No, say the word pool. And so oo is tense and oh is lax. So I say pool and I say pull. So pool, pull, oo, oh. With the longer one we call it tense, the shorter one we call it lax. And many of the sounds are paired like this, tense, lax. So we describe vowels again based on height and advancement, and also based on the labial rounding and tension. This is just a sample, but this chart is what we use in phonetics, and it is called the quadrilateral. It represents the space in the mouth where the tongue moves and the tongue makes speech. You can look here, if you can see where each sound is produced, and that space here where the tongue is and above and until you reach your lips, that is called the quadrilateral. So these are the 14 vowels. Ignore this one because it's not common. And in American English, it occurs in certain combinations, but it's not common. So these sounds, all of them, they share something, that in all of them the tongue comes forward in the oral cavity. We call them the front sounds, front phoneme, vowels. And the very top column, the very top row here, we have sounds, vowels that are made by the tongue being lifted high in the oral cavity. We call this high vowels. And there are vowels where the tongue is placed in the middle of the oral cavity. They call them mid vowels. And then there are ones that the tongue is low. We call them low vowels. So watch how I describe these vowels. This sound is E, as in eat. It might be good to write down each sound and the word that it comes in. Eat. So eat, the E is a high front unrounded, tense vowel. So we use only 4 criteria, 4 descriptors. Notice, look at the eh as in, so this is in eat, and this is eh as in it. So the eh is also high, front, unrounded, but lax vowel. So these are all the descriptors here for that sound. And then you go back and say these two, oo as in pool and oh as in pull. So oo is a high, back, rounded, tense vowel. The oh is exactly the same because it's in the same box. The tongue is a little bit lower, it doesn't matter, but it's not low enough, but it is still high. But the only difference is that the O is lax and the U is tense. The A as in Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So the A as in this at the end of each day of the week, that is a mid, front, unrounded, tense vowel. The this sound, we call it the epsilon, it comes in words like head, bed, read, said, epsilon. So that sound is also mid, front, unrounded, lax vowel. And then we come to the a as in cat. So cat, the a is low, front, unrounded, lax vowel. We don't worry about this one, but look at the central one. The tongue is both in the middle of the oral cavity and in the center in terms of positioning, but in terms of height, it is in the middle. So this sound is called the schwa, as in the first sound of alone, or above, or so it's a sound that is the weakest sound in English. We describe it as a mid, central, unrounded, lax vowel. So I don't want to, I just want to give you an idea. I am not going to ask you about this criteria like that, and I don't expect you to know these symbols. You are going to study them in phonetics. But I want you to know the 4 criteria themselves that we use to describe a vowel. Again, these are tongue height, tongue advancement, labial rounding, and muscular tension. These are 4 together. The last thing I'm just gonna to an idea. Ah, as in car. The ah is a low, back, tense, unrounded vowel, and again you are going to know this by heart when you take phonetics. Likewise, we describe consonants using criteria, but consonants are very different from vowels when we make them. So we have different criteria for consonants than for vowels. We look at the consonant and describe it in terms of placement. Where do you make it? Like the p. Oh, we make it at the lips. So that is going to make it a description. Like if it is the 2 lips, we say bilabial, like p. The 2 lips get together. And then we say, look at voicing. It means, do the vocal folds vibrate when you make the sound or not? And then we say, manner. How will the sound actually be when you make it? Does it make a friction? Does it make a stopping of the air? Or is it a combination of both? So again, this is just a simple chart, but here's one that you can use that's more functional, that will help you more. So I'd like you to know these three descriptors. You describe a consonant based on three criteria: based on voicing, if it is voiced or not; based on stopping, if it is, based on manner, what it sounds like when you actually make it; and based on the place where you make it. So quickly, I'm going to describe these consonants for you, and I might have you give you a few of them and say, describe them for me, for example, or true, false, multiple choice questions. For example, to say the p, what kind of sound is it is. For example, is it a voiced, bilabial, this and that. It might be just a couple, not much. So first, when you describe any of these, you begin with the voicing component. And then from voicing, you say the place. And then after that, you go back to the manner. So for example, p, voiceless, bilabial. Don't worry about these coronal, labial, dorsal, no. Just worry about the small labels here. So voiceless, bilabial, stop. And that's it. Now you notice that these sounds are actually most of them come in pairs. A pair of sounds that share the same placement and the same manner, and they are only different in voicing, we call them cognates. Cognates, C-O-G, and so on. Cognates. So a cognate pair is a pair of consonants that share the same placement and the same manner, but they are only different in voicing. And this is why, as you see them next to each other, this is a cognate pair, a cognate pair, a cognate pair, and there's a single here. So, p is a voiceless bilabial stop, b is a voiced bilabial stop. T, this category, all of these sounds, alveolar, go down, 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 down. All these sounds are produced by putting the tongue tip against a place in the oral cavity in the front here. It's called the alveolar ridge. Whenever you make one of these sounds, you feel your tongue contacting that area. As a result, we call this category, any of these sounds, an alveolar sound. So, t is a voiceless alveolar stop. D, the same way, but d is voiced. K, the tongue comes in contact with the velum or with the soft palate. These are the same name for the two names for the same thing. So k is a voiceless velar stop. G, the same, but g is voiced. As in the word ka, n, ba, n. So is a glottal stop, and it is made between the vocal folds, but the vocal folds do not vibrate. So we call it a voiceless glottal stop. So these are the stops: one pair, two pairs, three pairs, and a single. And then we have the fricatives. We have four pairs and the single. So f is a voiceless labiodental fricative. V is the same, but it is voiced. So that's a cognate pair. This symbol is th, as in thumb or math. So this th is a voiceless dental. It's actually better term to say interdental because the tongue is between the teeth. Interdental, voiceless interdental fricative. And then the, as in bathe or feather, that sound is voiced interdental fricative. S is a voiceless alveolar stop. Z is the same as that, but it's voiced. And then sh, that's a voiceless post-alveolar, or sometimes we call it voiceless palatal fricative. And the j, as in garage, that's voiced post-alveolar or voiced palatal fricative. And then we have the h, as in hand, and that's a voiceless glottal fricative. And then we have a category called the Affricate sounds. It's basically two sounds that are established or made by a combination of a stop and a fricative. They are called affricates. One of them is called ch, which is it's like saying the t and the sh, bringing t and sh together, and it is found in the when you say ch, as in catch, match. So the ch is a voiceless post-alveolar or palatal affricate, and the j is a voiced post-alveolar affricate. And then we have other sounds like is a voiced nasal, voiced bilabial nasal. And then we have the voiced alveolar nasal. This sound is the as in king, or bang, So is a voiced velar nasal, and then the voiced alveolar liquid. You go with that category, liquid. And the is a voiced post-alveolar or voiced palatal, and then liquid. And then down here, this is not showing on the screen. See, yeah, down here we are going to have the w and the y and the so w and y only, because that is the same one. So y as in yet, or yes, that is a voiced, and then palatal, and then glide. The only sound that has 4 placements in English is the w. That's the only sound that has 2 placements. So the w sound is a voiced bilabial, because your lips come oo, and voiced bilabial, and then velar, and then glide. That's the only sound that has 4 placements. So again, in phonetics, you're gonna study the vowels and the consonants, and you study them in so much depth until you master all of them here, and you know the descriptions and so on. So then now let's look at the content, about the building blocks of language again. I gave you quite a detailed introduction earlier, but now we're gonna add a little bit more to that information. So we said language focuses on meaning. Language is the content, the meaning of concepts and so on. And how do you construct language? So we have, I like to kind of look first at language form, the building blocks of the language, and then language content, the meaning of language, and then language use, what we use language for. Think about language. Initially, first, the most important function is to serve a purpose of conveying a message from a sender to a receiver. It's like building a house. You get bricks and you get, building materials. These are like the sounds and the words and the sentences that you get. So you can take these bricks and pieces of wood and so on to put them together in a certain way. And then you design a structure, you design a building. When you look inside of the building and you identify spaces, you call them rooms and so on, that is like saying the content. What is, this house, for example, it has 5 rooms, you can do this here, you can do that here, and so on. The content inside. And then you say, what is the idea? You have a building there. Why are you building it? What do you use it for? So you say, it is actually a kindergarten, or a preschool, or a house, or an office. Whatever that use is, the purpose of having that to us it would be like pragmatics is to language. So the language form is it is basically 3 of these components of language that any language has, and they are phonology, morphology, and syntax. These these are the rules that you use to build language. They are the building blocks of language. So we call these 3, we call them language form. So language form is includes phonology, morphology, and syntax. You need to really know that. And then language content is semantics, and the language use is called pragmatics. So let's begin with language form. Let's begin with phonology. Phonology, as I explained, is the science of the rules that you use to sequence phonemes in a certain way as to make syllables out of them. And there are rules. You can't randomly just put a bunch of sounds together and say this is a consonant. Every language has its own rules. For example, when you say a word in English, p and f, as in Pfizer, p and f, English does not allow, it doesn't have that rule. English says, no, you can't have a p and an f. To make, you can't have them together as a sound combination at the beginning of a word or anywhere, and then you can make a sound. So what do we do? The word comes from another language, but English doesn't acknowledge that kind of rule. So what do? We say p and f. So as a result, we drop the first sound. We drop the p completely. Or English doesn't have a rule to say you can put a p and an h, as in philosophy or phone. So what do we do? So, well, it is not there, but we have to, do something about it to make it into one sound. So we use the p and h, becomes an f. So each language has its own rules as to how you sequence sounds, you sequence phonemes together to make a syllable, and that science is called phonology. And then morphology is the science of the construction of the words, and it has to do with the meaning now. So now you are building from the basic elements to the bigger elements. So morphology is the study of the construction or the composition or the structure, or the composition of words. So the structure, another name for it is morphology. how are the words formed? What do they look like? How do you make a new concept out of an existing concept? So take the word, for example, I gave it earlier. Take the word right, as in right. That's the root of the word, and that word by itself means one single concept. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of language that gives meaning. It gives linguistic meaning. So for example, right, what does it mean? Oh, it is hold something and just, that has ink and something and make certain marks and print something, that is right. Okay, so then we have words like computer, one whole concept, one whole morpheme. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of language that has a linguistic meaning. If it doesn't have a linguistic meaning, it is not a morpheme. A morpheme is not, it doesn't depend on how many sounds it has. If it has one concept, it's one morpheme. Hippopotamus, hippocampus, all of these, so many sounds together, but it's a single concept. University is a single concept. So you need to know what a phoneme is, and you need to know to be able to count phonemes in words. Like say the word phone, how many phonemes does it have? Let's see. O, N. It has 3 phonemes. The word, for example, chair, how many phonemes? Ch, E, 3. But the word language, how many morphemes does it have? It has 1, because language is a morpheme by itself as a word. Chair, computer, car, any word that means a single concept is one free morpheme because it stands on its own and it means a single concept. So words in the dictionary that mean just a single concept are morphemes. And we call a word that stands by itself and is meaningful, we call it morpheme. But there's another kind of morphemes that it gives meaning, it has meaning, but it doesn't give meaning unless it is bound, unless it is tied to another morpheme, to a freestanding morpheme. Let's go back to the word right, and we see what we can add to it to make a different word out of it. So when you say right, we add the ER at the end, it will be right-er. Now we created a whole new morpheme. So at the end, it gives meaning, it's a concept. It actually refers to a person. So writer, it means person who writes. So say, for example, driver. Means it's a morpheme by itself, but it is bound, and it means the person who writes. Who drives. So if you want to test if this is a free or bound morpheme, break it apart and see if it can live by itself and it give you meaning. So put the ER somewhere. It doesn't mean anything if you put it individually and take the word right out or the word drive out. It will be just ER. So what does that mean? It has no meaning at all. But if once you attach it to the free morpheme, it comes to life. It gives meaning. So the word writer, it is 2 morphemes. Driver, 2 morphemes. Hope is 1. Hopeful, 2. Hopefully, 3. So I'd like you to know what a free morpheme is, what a bound morpheme is, be able to give examples, be able to identify the number of morphemes in a word, and definitely differentiate between free morpheme and the bound morpheme. There are more examples in your text. So syntax is grammar, basically, syntax. And grammar is basically a set of rules for making various shapes of sentences. So you have a sentence that has a subject and a verb and an object. The cat ate the fish. A sentence that has two words only, it's a subject and a complement. Like, for example, the cat runs, the cat sleeps, Sam slept. Two words make a sentence. So, but each sentence has a different shape, and the different shapes, each shape is based on a certain rule, a certain grammatical rule. So these rules are basically like recipes for how to make certain types of sentences for the language. So these are components. I'd like you to know the components of language form. What are the three components of language form? Morphology, phonology, morphology, and syntax. Language content, as I explained earlier, is the semantics. Semantics has to do with the meaning of individual words and the meaning of sentences. So you say, for example, class. What is that? What does it mean? It is a place where you go for learning, or maybe it is a group of students, or so the meaning of words or the meaning of sentences, that is what semantics is. And lexicons are the words that you have in your mind. Lexicon is your mental dictionary, and then each one of these words in your mental dictionary represents the meaning of a concept in the world. Like when you say, for example, tea mug, for example, the mug, and they have the word in your mind, tea mug, and that is the real object. So these match together. So what's in your mind when you say cup or mug? Rep is a concept that stands for a concept in the real world. Then language use is pragmatics. Pragmatics means how and why you use language in a certain environment. The use of language in different contexts. So basically it has to do with, for example, when you speak, are you brief? Are you staying on topic? Are you, for example, taking turns? Are you listening? Are you using words of politeness? And how you interact in a conversation or in a give and take kind of language in a certain environment. Like when you go to your doctor, you are going, because of pragmatic rules, you are going to speak in a certain way. You are going to speak about certain topics. You are not going to your doctor to tell jokes or to speak about things that don't matter to the physician. You are going to go for a special purpose. And you use language and words and vocabulary and so on to serve that purpose. And you are going to say these words in a certain way at a certain time and so on. If you are in the courtroom, you are going to use particular words. You behave in a certain way, like the judge comes in, you stand up. So, like rules for a certain environment or for a certain place, and you use particular terms and words, and you say them in a certain way, following certain rules. That is what pragmatics is about. So in the remaining part, I'm going to speak about highlights of language development, language acquisition and development, and then speak a little bit about the professions of speech-language pathology, audiology, and speech and hearing science. So from the beginning, language, the development of language or the acquisition of language actually begins before birth. And the newborn I mean, the child, for example, 4 months before the child is born, that child is able to hear, can hear sounds, and can hear the mother's voice. And that child is going to acquire certain parts of the speech and language before the child is born. So language development begins before birth and continues basically to maybe high school at some point. And then whatever happens after is embellishment. So the baby's born, and first thing is, we know that the babies cry. I mean, they can spend like a whole week like only eating, sleeping and crying. When the baby cries, crying teaches the child that when she or he cries, someone comes to help them. So when the baby makes that association, oh, I cry, someone comes and helps me, changes my diaper, or someone comes and feeds me, and someone does this, then the baby then learns. When he or she wants to get someone, they cry. The person comes in, the baby stops crying. But also, so that's in terms of meaning, as a way of communication. Come here, you cry. I mean, you want to bring someone to your help, you cry, the baby cries, and then the person comes and helps, the baby stops. Then, also, crying serves another purpose. Crying enables the baby to control the air, as the air goes out and in, and when you cry, the vocal folds are vibrating, and that enables eventually the baby to regulate the flow of air in and out, and to be able to eventually control how the air is going out to make speech. So that eventually is going to help the baby block the vocal folds, build pressure, and a sufficient pressure to vibrate the vocal folds and to eventually speak and say words. So it functions in a way as to teach the baby how to regulate air pressure very early in life. There's a video here. I hope that you look at it, and a couple of videos that show interaction between kids and also the language of kids at a certain age. So a milestone that's very important that occurs in, for example, 2 months to 3 months, the baby coos. We say cooing, ooh, making sounds. These sounds help the baby experiment with vowels. So by the 4th month of life, the baby has a set of vowels and that he or she can make. Then we call this cooing, and then between 4 months and 6 months, that period of time, the baby practices combining consonants and vowels. Pa, ma, ma, da, da, and that is called babbling. And then 6 months to 8 months, the baby makes more advanced babbling, combining making bigger chunks of the words, bigger syllables, and so on. And that is just comes before the baby says the first word. So the baby says the first word around the last week of, the end of the 10th month or the beginning of the 11th month. But definitely, most children should have the first word by their first birthday. Then at age 18 months, the vocabulary is a little bit advanced. The baby has about 400 words vocabulary that enables the baby to combine words together so that he or she can start to make sentences. Basic sentences emerge between 18 months and 24 months. And then that is called the toddler year, is from the first birthday to the end of the second year. We call them toddlers. And then from the second year to the 5th year, these are the preschool, before they go to school, the preschool years. And the children at that time, they make better sentences. They correct the sentences by adding verbs and advancing their sentence structure and being able to tell a story. Like a story, I mean, it means like mommy went to the store and bought bread, for example. Or so it's basic things. And then the school age, of course, begins with kindergarten and goes until high school. But language matures by age 11 to 12 years. It becomes adult-like, and that child is able to speak like an adult, except that the adult is more sophisticated, has more advanced vocabulary, and has a higher control over other aspects of the language. But all the framework of language, all of it now by age 11 or 12 years, it is similar to that of an adult. The high upper grades, say middle school, high school, they focus more on the written language. Written language is more advanced. Written language requires more cognitive effort, more attention, and it has an advantage that you can go back and fix it. But in spoken language, you say the word and it is gone. You cannot take it back and fix it and give it again. So this is why written language is more complicated and more demanding. Adulthood, of course, it continues the on the expression of language and adding more sophistication to the pragmatics. What's the polite way to do this? To speak, for example, in a company, when you go for an interview, what is the most effective way? You look for like advanced ways of using language to serve important functions, purposes for your job and for working as a contributing member of your community. Okay, I basically spoke about this right a bit earlier, and this too. So during the preschool years, we have phonology, the development of speech sounds. For example, by 2 and 5 years, you have the sound system becomes very advanced, except that children sometimes, significant number of them are still building the sound system, are still experimenting with sounds. They might have difficulty with certain situations. They might omit certain sounds or distort certain sounds. So it is common to say the word frog. The child must say fog instead of frog, because at that time, say early, like 2 years, 3 years, the child doesn't have the R sound yet. The nervous system develops later, and then when they are able to, when they have the ability neurologically to produce the then they will be able to add it later. Children, very young children, they might substitute a sound for another sound. Like, for example, cup, the child might say top. Or car, the child might say tar. So these are common in that age, but as they continue to vocalize and to speak, they are going to acquire these sounds. If they do not, then we say they have a speech sound disorder or delay. Morphology and syntax, at that time, the child is able to make parts of sentences. The child is able to say, for example, a basic sentence, the basic structure, like the cat ate the fish, for example. The child is able to say, for example, using auxiliary verbs. Verbs, we know a sentence has a single verb, but There are sentences that has a single main verb and the verb that is a helper verb or an assistive. Assistive verb is called an auxiliary, like this. The cat walks. The cat walks. The walks is a verb, main verb. But I can take is and I put is before walk. And then I'm going to add ing. So I say the cat is walking. So walking is the main verb. But is, I inserted there to help me specify a certain way of the action. So when I say the cat walks, that's a matter of fact. The cat has the ability to walk. But when I say the cat is walking, now is and the ing that I add at the end, it means as we speak, now the cat is walking. So we use auxiliary verbs to add more specific meaning to the action that is happening, and we call these auxiliary verbs, and the child is able to use them in the preschool years. Discourse, it has to do with interaction, communication, interactions, mostly conversation and narration, narrative. Like I'm telling you a story. Or look at this video that I am making. That's a kind of discourse. I am discussing a topic, but I am the only one speaking. So that is narration. Stories, books, novels, lectures. These are part of discourse, a kind of discourse. But discourse can also be a conversation. A conversation, you speak, I listen, I speak, you listen, and we keep interchanging our roles as listener and speaker. So in conversation, during these years, 2 and 5 years, the child can use emphatic terms, can use assertiveness, can use responsiveness. Assertiveness has to do with, like, the child says something to you and you do not understand. The child says something like speaking to you and you are looking in your phone. You are not answering the child. How does the child become assertive? He comes and takes the phone down, pulls your phone down, looks at you and says, "Look at me," and would say the words again, or the sentence, or what he is looking for. Assertiveness. So it is basically being sure that the point you want to make is carried across, that the person has gotten the message, and that you are satisfied the message is received by the listener. Responsiveness is your job as a person in conversation. Like I say something and say, you go like this, or you might, for example, I say a word or ask a question, you respond in an appropriate way. The children can do that at that time. So in terms of the children can engage in conversation, but these are the areas they develop in the preschool years. In terms of narration, they're able to tell personal stories, like something that happened on the bus, something that happens in the classroom, something that happens in a cafeteria, playground, whatever. It can be anything that happened, describing an event. It may be personal. They can even make up their own stories. And then the school years from ages 5 to 21, they focus a lot on lexical semantics, so like building vocabulary. So, for example, every year on average, they learn about 3,000 words. So by the end of high school, the person is going to have about 60,000 or 65,000 words in his or her vocabulary. By the end of college, they would have at least 120,000 words in their vocabulary. That's just the at least the average, and this is all data, because nowadays, the internet and all, we have so much language around us. We learn more every day. So they focus in terms of relational semantics is also developed during the school years. For example, using figurative language, using metaphors, in idioms, similes. Also, they in the early school years, like kindergarten especially, and the first grade and the second grade, we call this the primary school years. Children focus so much on phonological awareness. I'm going to tell you what that is. Phonological awareness is being aware of a sound when it is, say, at the beginning of a word, or at the end, or in the middle, recognizing the sound, hearing it, knowing that it is there, knowing it accurately, being able to come up with the sound and you put it in a certain place. These skills are very important for learning how to read. And if someone doesn't learn doesn't have phonological awareness, they will never be able to read. So they, for example, I'm gonna say, look for the sound k as I am gonna say some words. And whenever I say a word that has k at the beginning of the word, raise your hand. So now I'm gonna start. Sam. Was there a k at the beginning? Did the word begin with k? Kite, lamp, keyboard. So then you can do this at the end. Now I'm going to say words that have the k at the end, and I'm going to say a number of words, and then you tell me, raise your hand when I say a word that has the k at the end. Class, bike, computer, strike. So, and you only focus on sound. So this is just the basic forms of phonological awareness, and it becomes more complicated where you think about segmenting sounds, words into sounds and syllables. For example, keyboard. I'd like you to break it down into smaller parts. Say key and then board. Basketball, basket, and then you have ball. So listen to me. I'm gonna say some words, and you tell me what I ask you. Say basketball, okay? Say basketball. Now say basketball without basket. So you are supposed to say ball. Say basketball without ball. Say basket. Now I'm gonna make it more complicated. Say the word. Say the word cute. Now say it without t. Now you should say Q. Okay. Now say, for example, I'm going to say a word and you tell me what I am saying. K, E. So you should say key. K, U, L. So you should say cool. So I say it this way and you tell me what I am saying. Or I'm going to give you a word and you break it down, you segment it. Say cool, break it down into individual sounds, and then you say ka, u, u. So these are skills, again, are very important, and they teach them basically even in preschool, but more intensively in kindergarten and the first grade, because you want the child to be a reader by the end of the second grade, but definitely by the beginning of the third grade. So during the also school years, the children begin from preschool, from kindergarten and the elementary. They master by the end of the primary school years, by the end of second grade, they master morphology. They know how to take a word and add something to it, for example, writer. How to take a word and add a morpheme to it, like say cat, they make cats out of it. They know that if they want to say 5 and the word cat, that would be 5 cats, not 5 cat. They will be able to know the irregular verbs and the irregular nouns, goose, geese. They should know that, for example, when you say I write, when you say yesterday, then you say yesterday I wrote. So they know the past tense, and they know the irregular forms of verbs and nouns, and also the terms of, as they grow older, they learn more of how to engage, use idioms in conversation, use conversational speech. For example, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna be glad, and so on. So in the school years also, and middle school, high school, definitely the main development involves the complexity of pragmatics, discourse. You don't tell basic stories, you tell more advanced narratives. You are able to expand on what you say. You are going to explain. You are going to be able to use the language as a tool to persuade others, and how you use it. You can use it to negotiate. You know what? I'm going to give you this, you give me that, and you know, if you don't, and then you use it as a way to obtain advantages in the society that you live in. You use language to achieve special purposes, whether for job or grades or social relationships and so on. And that is significantly the main focus of high school and college is on that. In adulthood, 21 or and above, the language development involves learning more vocabulary words. And the more you read, the more education you have, the more you build your vocabulary. There is no limit to as how many words you have. And then at some point, 70, maybe something like that, given that you are not enriching your mind, you are not seeking to learn more and stuff, then at some point, vocabulary begins to decline as cognitive abilities begin to decline, because the memory becomes poor. You would not be able, you would have difficulty acquiring new vocabulary and new concepts, and then at the same time the ones you already have you'll forget, start to forget what you already know. So that is a function of aging, and that's normal aging anyways. And the person will also have difficulty comprehending complex language, because as we age, our memory becomes weaker, our cognitive abilities, our attention and so on become weaker. And go back to what I said at the beginning, language depends on cognitive abilities, so that you need memory to be able to focus, to be able to hold the topic in your mind as you are speaking. And if you do not remember, you are gonna confuse your listeners and so on. So language depends a lot on cognitive abilities. That means memory, that means attention, that means long-term memory, working memory, and so on. So that is why the decline of vocabulary and the decline in comprehension skills and so on, it is because of the cognitive decline that we experience as we age. So again, even though language primarily is acquired and mastered and is in a full adult form by age 11 years and 12 years of age, the embellishments will happen in adulthood. The embellishment will be a lot focused on pragmatics, because you have language, you have words, you have everything, but there is something that there is no limit as how far advanced you are in pragmatics. Pragmatics it works on how you use language and where, and how you use it in the best way to achieve the purpose that you have. So you might learn the ways to use it in America, and you are perfect in how to negotiate, how to use language and use it effectively to convince and persuade and make social relationships and this and that. But you go to China, for example, then you say, oops, they have a different system of pragmatics. The way, the gestures, the way they talk, for example, they might speak. When someone speaks, everyone else has to be completely paying attention. Maybe so. There are differences in pragmatics. The more you travel around and you discover how other people communicate, and you learn more about other, parts of the country that you live in and other countries, then you continue to build pragmatics. As long as you go and discover, there will be more pragmatic skills to learn. For example, you go to the South and you are walking down the street, say on campus. Someone meets you, they lift up their hand and say, good morning, and you might have a chat with that person. A random stranger. But here, you say that, good morning, someone's going to think you are a moron. Like, what? Why that person is speaking? So before you call someone, here most of us call 1, 2, 3. This is so and so. I want this. I am calling because of this and this and that. But say in another location, maybe the South, you can't just barge in, call and okay, I need this and this and no. Mostly, you have some kind of warm-up conversation. How are you? How are the kids? How is the wife? This and this and that. And then way down the conversation, well, I'm calling you because of this and this and that. So pragmatics is not about who is like, pragmatics is about the rules that a certain community uses and that everyone recognizes these rules. So when they speak this way. And if you go to another community, you are going to find that they have a different set of rules, and you are gonna need to learn these rules if you are to function appropriately in your job or in the community and so on. This is a summary of basic milestones, and each milestone is going to emerge at a certain age, and you can find more in your text. So this is wraps up the discussion. We spoke about communication, the difference between communication, language, and speech. We spoke about the components of language, the 5 components of language, and these are found in any language at all. There are about 6,000 to 8,000 languages in the world. Each one has its own systems of phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. And then we spoke about how these language and speech skills develop from birth to adulthood and how they start to decline with aging as we age. So I hope that that you find this helpful. So you have it to listen to it again if you wish. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.